A planet like Ferrix will be overlooked by most. It's not the most glamorous place in the galaxy. It's essentially one large wasteland dotted with towns and giant fields of military salvage. In many ways, it screams, "Leave me alone. We're fine here. Beware of dog." But of course, as Nemec so eloquently put it,
the Imperial need for control is so desperate because it is so unnatural.
Unnatural and not necessarily logical, like trying to bring Ferrix beneath the Empire's control using force.
Oppression is the mask of fear.
Dictatorships, authoritarian regimes, at their core, their desire for control over everything is their great weakness. It shows us their anxiety, their fear of anything that is different from what they are. This cowardice clouds their judgment and overwhelms the more rational and pragmatic forces in the galaxy. Forces like the positive economic, political, and social powers that are trying to grow and develop society. Now, what is it that Emperor Palpatine always says he's trying to create?
For a safe and secure society.
Actual peace and stability is not created through overbearing control from a central authority.
Tyranny requires constant effort. It breaks. It leaks. Authority is brittle.
Peace and stability cannot be forced by heavy-handed measures. Instead, it needs to be built from the ground up through shared enlightened values and beliefs. We're talking about economic, social, and political systems that do as much as possible to keep the individual free, prosperous, and well-educated. Now, humans have been pursuing this perfect system, utopia, since the beginning of time, and although we never get it exactly right, it's becoming very clear what works and what doesn't. Generally speaking, the more dispersed and shared the power is, the more checks and balances there are available to regulate excesses, the better off a society is. And as all dictators will find out, even though they're not holding free elections, public opinion actually does matter. Even the most powerful leaders are beholden to what the masses think. In a free and open society where people are allowed to voice their concerns, a government can react to those concerns and understand what's going on. But in societies where censorship is applied heavily to the voices outside of the main government narrative, by the time the ruling parties hear about the public's opinion, it'll already be too late for them. The people will be marching out on the streets, protesting against unlivable conditions. And if the people turn against the dictatorship, no military force in the galaxy will be large enough to stop its angry tide of resentment. Now, worlds like Ferrix are uniquely suited to rebel against the Galactic Empire. Now, Ferrix has a strong culture and society that actually grew as a result of thousands of years of neglect from the Galactic Republic. But before we get to that, a quick word from our sponsor for today's video. That's Pixel Starships. This is an awesome 8-bit 2D spaceship simulator and has a really cool gameplay loop. So in this game, you build a starship. You slowly upgrade it, increase its size so that you can build new weapons, defenses, and other support rooms. And in order to afford these new modules, you have to gather more materials, go on missions, fight pirates, and of course, recruit new members to your cause. The combat itself is reminiscent of FTL. You have to juggle your power resources between a variety of offensive and defensive systems that you have on your ship, and you also get to tactically choose what part of your enemy ship you want to attack. Do you go after their weapons emplacements first to prevent further damage to your own vessel, or do you go after their reactor so that you can try to cut off all power to their ship? When tackling much higher level enemy ships, it can be actually quite a challenge to get out alive. And finally, when you're comfortable enough with how the game works, you can even challenge other players in PvP mode. Pixel Starships is available on PC and also mobile for free download. If you guys are interested in playing this game, please check out the link down below. If you sign up using our link, you'll get 100 free Starbucks in-game, and that'll allow you to upgrade your ship quickly into fighting shape. Well, thank you for your patience. On to the rest of the video. Worlds like Ferrix were always going to be a problem. Located in the free trade sector in the Morlana system, this planet was placed beneath the control of the Preox Morlana Corporate Authority. We're not told where exactly the free trade sector is located, but I'm willing to bet it's somewhere in the northeast quadrant of the galaxy in the Outer Rim, around formerly separatist areas. Cassian Andor, as we now know, once fought with the separatists against the clone occupation. Throughout galactic history, the Outer Rim has more or less been isolated from the rapid growth that the coreward areas of the galaxy has experienced. Two major roadblocks kept worlds like Ferrix from being like Corellia, Coruscant, and Alderaan. One was the lack of stable hyperspace lanes in the area, and two was, of course, security. Because worlds like Ferrix were less than desirable to live on, it also meant that the cost of living and the land prices on Ferrix were quite cheap. Now, for most of galactic history, the Republic was unsuccessful at bringing prosperity to the Outer Rim territories. From an economic standpoint, it just wasn't really worth it, something that the Empire probably should have learned from. The cost of stationing a giant federal garrison on the planet just didn't make any sense. The kind of threats that locals faced were usually in the form of criminal cartels and pirate gangs. And at the same time, because of a lack of capital investment on these worlds, planets like Ferrix were usually too poor to fund their own planetary defense forces. On several occasions throughout galactic history, the Republic has actually lost several Outer Rim territories to various renditions of the Sith Empire, and unfortunately, the sad truth was this was the Galactic Republic's military strategy when fighting outside threats. They would basically use the Outer Rim as a buffer zone, just this massive space that would take up time and troops, that need to be garrisoned there. And while the Sith Empire or the Yuzhang Vong are being delayed by these Outer Rim territories, the Republic would use that time to build up their own military to respond. And you wonder why Count Dooku's separatist movement was so popular in the Outer Rim. Simply put, they've been neglected by the Core since the beginning of time. And then you have things like the Ruusan Reformation, which happened 1,000 years before the Clone Wars. The Republic basically demilitarized their federal military, which of course meant that the Outer Rim was even more screwed. As a matter of fact, the only time anyone tried to do anything for the Outer Rim, aside from Count Dooku's destructive separatist movement, was a short period of time during the High Republic when the Jedi built the Starlight Beacon and began to station heavily armed Jedi quick reaction forces in the Outer Rim to respond to requests for aid. The Starlight Beacon was a good gesture, sort of like the Jedi's Death Star in many ways. It practically didn't really do much, but it definitely caused a lot of bandits to think twice before raiding a settlement. Ultimately, the thing that really brought development to the Outer Rim was deregulation. Specifically, the free trade zone that would be established by the Senate roughly around the end of the High Republic era. It would attract mega conglomerates like the Trade Federation, Techno Union, and corporate alliances to establish massive operations in the Outer Rim territories. Entire supply chains were set up overnight: mines, refineries, factories, and warehouses and shipping fleets. Suddenly, the Outer Rim was in business and highly profitable. Many of these corporate entities basically established their own fiefdoms in these areas where there was a huge vacuum in Republic authority. They would exploit local labor and trap them in debt schemes, forcing them to work for next to nothing. The moral of the story is that the Outer Rim territories have been constantly screwed by political entities, corporate entities, and everyone else you can think of. But the thing is, with every action, there is usually a reaction. And so in worlds like Ferrix, we see the development of a fiercely independent society, one that's not very trusting of outsiders. And at the core of the society is their main industry, which is salvaging. This is one of the most common industries in free Outer Rim worlds, from Jakku to Bracca. It's not really lucrative enough for large mega conglomerates to get involved, and so independent companies, smaller local firms, and even groups of individuals instead were the ones who began to take these Clone Wars relics and break them down into spare parts. The raw materials and components were stripped out and sold for a decent amount of credits. Remember, Ferrix is a relatively easy and cheap planet to live on.
Look how quickly that's cleaned up. Hard to believe, right? 2 minutes. No longer, no shorter. You know why they don't make this anymore? Because I'd rather sell you a brand new system at 10 times the price.
I mean, these people completely reject consumerism. Look at the interiors of their houses. Look at Marva's plant holders. They look like exhaust pipes, maybe from a ship or a speeder. The tiles that form a backsplash for Tim's kitchen most likely also were salvaged from a ship interior. He definitely didn't buy them from Florin Decor. It should be important to note that unlike on Bracca, where a large guild controls all the salvaging, or on Jakku, where you have scrap dealers like Unkar Plutt squeezing everyone's profits, the salvagers on Ferrix seem to have developed a relatively fair system of distributing wealth. You have multiple small businesses selling scrap like the one run by Bix and Tim. They also have competitors who they're friendly with, like the one run by Salman Pak. Small businesses like this are the cornerstone of small towns like Ferrix. They create jobs and they create middle-class families. The salvagers themselves look strong, well-fed, and nourished. They have nice houses to go home to, extra money to spend at the bar and other places. This is definitely not a wealthy city by any means, but it definitely feels like a home that they will cherish and fight for. You can see the care put into the city wherever you look. It's the little details in the shops, the lack of broken lights and cracked windows. Everything is cluttered but well taken care of and respected. Even the workers' salvage gloves are arranged neatly on a wall and not just thrown haphazardly into a bin. And each glove is different and unique, just like the people who wear them. Worlds like Ferrix thrive because they learned how to live without outside support, without the Galactic Republic, and without the Galactic Empire. Their natural distrust of strangers and lack of raw resources that could be harvested meant that they stayed off of the Empire's radar for a pretty long time. This mentality also extends to the strong community that has been built here. This is a city full of customs and traditions. You have the bell tower man who climbs his way to the top every morning and night to mark the beginning and end of the day's work shifts. Look at the craftsmanship and respect placed into the tools of his trade. Look at how polished his hammers and anvil are. We also have the tradition of cremating the dead and placing their ashes in bricks that make up the entire city. The dead literally serve as a foundation for future generals, which is kind of poetic. And if you take a look at the people in this city, they're all together. They cherish life, they cherish their loved ones, and they also try to remember those who have passed on. And then there are those little chimes built out of scrap metal that the people of Ferrix use to warn the city of danger, whether it be a fire or a bunch of tactical blueberries on the prowl. We also have organizations like the Daughters of Ferrix. They're a social club and they take care of those in need on Ferrix. The former leader Marva is clearly a community leader respected by many, and it's her words and her funeral that starts the uprising on the planet in the first place. And so when you have such a close-knit community, when you hurt one of them, that pain will be felt by many. When you implant a spy amongst their numbers, that spy will stick out like a sore thumb, making their job all that much more difficult. Yes, at first glance, Ferrix might not be all that remarkable, but if you look closely, you'll notice that there's a lot here for the locals to fight for. Chief Hines of the Preox Morlana Authority ultimately had the right idea. A policy of avoidance and non-enforcement was the best way to deal with Ferrix. That's clearly what his policy had been until Shul Karn and Sergeant Tactical Blueberry carried out their ill-fated mission to the planet.
Haven't seen any blues in a while. What the hell are they doing?
And remember, there also used to be clones on this planet as well, but they also packed their bags and left. The thing is, the Empire is arrogant. They don't do their research. They don't consider previous history, prior incidents, the local culture. They don't do a cost-benefit analysis like the corporate authority would do before starting a security operation. They just want control and power. Is it really smart for the Empire to get rid of the local corporate authority who was funding their own security mission or lack of security, and most likely also still paying tax revenue to the Empire? The Empire would replace the corporate authority in that area, and it would send hundreds of soldiers and other support staff, and while it did have, quote, control over the area, at what cost? They don't have quite enough soldiers to truly pacify Ferrix, but enough soldiers to cost a considerable amount of credits and piss off the locals. And as we mentioned, these are not people you want to be messing around with. Imprison one, hang another, and suddenly the whole city is out and about and ready to rip stormtroopers apart with their bare hands. These were hardy people, resourceful people who knew how to work with their hands and tinker. They knew how to build bombs in their homes out of salvage. I mean, they're literally taking apart Star Destroyers in their backyard, so I imagine the amount of unexploded ordnance and munitions they have is probably pretty impressive. And their work, it's made them big, strong, and used to tribulation. And because they choose to fight together, they won't go down easily. And then we have the Empire's flaw. It demands obedience, and it will pursue Ferrix and break itself upon its hardened defenses without thinking about the costs. They'll spend far more resources and Imperial lives than necessary, and the ultimate result might be terrible anyway. The Empire is stubborn. It must not lose face. If one world can revolt and get away with it, or even worse, force the Empire to retreat, it might inspire other worlds to do the same thing. It might inspire new rebel cells to pop up, and that would be unacceptable.
Security is an illusion. We are health care providers. We treat sickness. We identify symptoms. We locate germs, whether they arise from within or have come from the outside.
Luckily for Ferrix, the Empire has yet to complete the Death Star, but the Death Star is really just a silly toy. A fleet of Imperial-class Star Destroyers would be able to reduce Ferrix to a pile of rubble from orbit, which of course would destroy all of the growth and economic value on the planet. But that's sort of how dictators like Palpatine function. If he can't have it, then no one can. Just take a look at Operation Cinder and his contingency plan. And so under his command, the Empire's actions on worlds like Ferrix are ultimately going to be unsustainable and cause a lot more problems than they solve. And I think Luthen Rael senses this dilemma they face, and he'll use this lesson he's learned from Ferrix in the future. He needs more worlds like Ferrix. He needs more Vietnams and Afghanistans, hardy nations full of hardy people, connected by a strong social fabric and a desire to fight that's more durable than Durasteel itself. That made sense, right?